All right. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the second stream on Twitch from Unqork. This one is called, aptly titled Unqork 201, which, as you can imagine, is going to be a little more complex add-on to the 101 that we did last time for you. Now, when I was here last time, I did promise you that I was going to try to work video games into our demo or into our stream. I was able to do that. And last time around it was baseball, and in spite of all the sabermetrics and the unwritten rules that come with baseball, video games apparently are still more complex, which allowed us to do something more complex today with video games. And for that, I think I even referenced last time that we're going to go with Halo, a new first-person shooter for the Xbox. And while I am no means a fashionable person, I'm trying to keep these Twitch streams a little bit fashionable. So last time around when we did the baseball demo, I had my Washington Nationals shirt on. This time around, I've got my green and black getup for Master Chief. So with that all being said, I hope you're all ready and ready to see some more cool stuff that you can do entirely with no code inside of Unqork. So let's dive right in. So the first thing I'm going to do here is let's jump back into the workspace. We covered workspaces applications last time. Jump back into the workspace where I'm doing all these builds. This time around, rather than using some of the filters over here, or the sorts over here to get to my workspace, let's use Unqork search feature. Okay, and actually I practiced this, I guess. My name is already typed in there. So effectively, you're going to be able to search your entire environment. You'll be able to search for modules, workflows, applications, data collections, and in this case, in this place, workspaces, right? So the workspace that I was doing my work in, if you recall, was my espaço de trabalho de Nick. So let's jump into the workspace. All right, and now let's just go in and let's create an application for today's build. This time we're going to be live building. All right, last time showed you a prefabricated application, just kind of walked through some of that logic. We're going to build this thing from scratch today. All right, so first thing over here, we're going to create an application. And we'll call this application Halo. It'll autofill some of this. I'm going to leave some of these settings blank now, but I promise you I will not ignore them for every switch that we do, and we'll come back to it. And in this case, we're going to do a module-based application. So last time around, we did a workflow-based application, and you saw everything or a lot of the things that you can do with a workflow. In this case, we're going to keep it to a module application, because in reality, not everything that you're going to build is going to be a workflow. So you can kind of come at your application from two different angles. So I'm going to do a module-based application. I'm going to create a new entry point. So it's going to create that module. It's going to be, the entry point and the center of the application that we're creating. So go ahead and create this. And it'll drop me right in there. So now I've got my Halo application inside of my workspace with a module available to me. Okay. Now, one thing we're also going to do differently here today, so we're going to get some more complex stuff. We're going to talk about some of the security features that exist in Unqork. All right. So for this, we're actually going to create roles. We're going to create roles. We're going to create users, and then you're going to see later on we're going to create groups to control access to what it is we're building today. So in order to do that, I'm going to jump over to my administration screen here, and I'm going to create a role. Okay. So in this case, we're building a Halo application. So we're going to create a Spartan. Okay. And that's, what Master Chief is, what all the soldiers in the Halo series are. So we're going to create a role called Spartan. Okay. Now down here, you can see you can define a default permission for the role. All right. Now Unqork has a security first model in everything that we build. So you'll see the default permission that we're going to give this role is no access, which means by default, they're not going to have access to any modules or workflows or anything really that you build within Unqork. And that's then going to allow you to go into the specific areas of your environment, your different apps, modules, workflows, as I said, and grant access where appropriate. So this is the way you want to be building your security, least privileges to start, and then allow access where required. Right? So we're just simply going to add this role here. Now we've got a role inside called Spartan, and let's set up a couple of users right now that we're going to use throughout the build and just get them out of the way. So the first thing, we'll call this one Nick Spartan, and that'll be Nick plus Spartan at Unqork. Okay, I'll call it Spartan 1, so it's clear. Just so you know, if folks are Gmail users, this plus is a really handy convention that you can use inside of your Gmail. It allows you to basically register, assuming the website that you're registering allows you to use a plus sign. It allows you to create a number of different, let's call them sub emails that all will still send to your main email address, allowing you to build filters and labels inside of Gmail to section off the different emails you receive. So for this case, it's also very handy in Unqork because it allows me to create a number of different users as I'm building it, as I'm testing it, as I'm debugging and working with the applications I have, create a number of different users, but still use my email address. So I don't have to go off and create 1,001 different email accounts just to be able to test my various different applications. So we'll create Nick plus Spartan1, and we're going to give it the role of Spartan. Okay, I'll come down here, add user and notify. And let's just do that same thing again. And we'll call this Nick Spartan again, Nick plus Spartan2 at unqork.com. And we'll give that a Spartan as well. Cool. So now we've got two, we got a role set up, and we've got a couple of users set up. Now, as I said, by default, these users have no access to anything in the environment. So let's jump into the module. This entry point module was created for me when I built my application. And let's give this role, or anyone with this role, access to the module we're going to be building. So I'll open up my module builder, and I'm going to jump over here to our settings tab. There's a number of different settings that we can play with. I'll only touch on a few right now. So first off, let's just add one called page title. All right, so this is what appears up in your browser tab. What search engines are going to look at when you do a search in Google. I assume that's all anyone's still doing searches for. I'm sure there's a few people who are binging it out there, and actually I'm talking about a Microsoft game, so I'm sure they would love if I said that people are binging, but I don't know if that's the case. One way or another, we're going to throw Halo as our title there, and you'll see customize Rbac. This is a toggle that's already enabled for me in my module. So any module that you create in Unqork is going to have this setting available, which then allows you to control, again, who has access. So in this case, you'll see down here, our Spartan role has no access because that was the default permissions that we gave to the role earlier on. So I'm just going to change this to write access because we're going to want them to be able to pull this module up, enter data, and do everything really that you can imagine what's inside the module. So we're going to hit here and we're going to hit write. Great. And now we've got access to this module for our Spartan role, and we can go ahead and we can start building. So for this, the crux of this, so this is all going to be built around a Halo Infinite API that I found. An API where I can go pull back information about what medals are available when you have a good game or do something good within a game, and also your statistics as a gamer, how many wins you have, losses you have, so on and so forth, and you'll see some of the other data that comes back in this API as we go through the build. So let's show you, how easy it really is to connect to an API inside of Unqork. So once again, with security being a primary focus of all of this, in order to connect to external services, you're going to go into our services administration. You're going to create a new service for that system that you're going to connect to, for that API that you're going to connect to. All right. So I actually went ahead, and I believe I did this ahead of time. And I'll just show it though. So you name your service, whatever you'd like it to be. In this case, we're calling it Halo. And then you drop in the service protocol and host. So what's this? This is all, the rest of this information is information that you're going to find in the API documentation of the system that you're connecting to. So I found the API docs here, and you'll see that for each and every request that I'm going to make, it's going to start with the same beginning. It's all going to start with the same URL, and then oftentimes it might have some part of the path that's going to be consistent on every single request that you make. So in this case, I'm going to take as much of that URL that's consistent, and I'm going to put it in there. All right, and this is going to prefix, as you'll see later, all the calls I'm going to make to this API. Now, in terms of authentication, there are a number of different types of authentication that an API is going to afford you or going to require you to go through in order to get access to it. In this case, the API requires a simple bearer token, all right, which means they're going to generate a token for me, which I'm not going to show you by clicking this button, but trust me, this is it right here, masked. Okay, and I took this token, generated it directly from within, again, the system that's API I'm connecting to, and then I just dropped it into this bearer token field. A bearer token is just one of the many ways that you can authenticate into APIs and many ways that Unqork is going to allow you to authenticate to APIs out of the box. All right, you have no authentication. Let's just say for whatever reason, this is a wide open API and they don't care who hits it and how many times. You can just call it directly. But you're more likely going to see things like OAuth, OAuth2, whether that's client credentials, password, JWT, various different types of OAuth, as well as a custom other like basic auth header, custom SOAP headers. Again, a lot of options that you're going to get here that pretty much cover the entire world of authentication on top of APIs available. So again, in this case, it's just a bearer token, and I drop my token in, I hit save, and now I've got my API connection set up. Now let's go actually make an API call with this, okay? So first thing I'm going to do there is I'm going to drop in a plugin component. And I think I showed this last time, but this is basically our visual API connector, okay? So I'm going to call this plug metals because the first API that I'm going to hit is going to be an API that's going to pull back all the metals that are available to you to win or to earn and achieve as you're playing the game, okay? Down in service type, I'm going to come in and I'm going to choose Halo as my service type. And you'll see, as I said before, it's going to pre-fill what I typed in. It's going to start, everything. I'm going to jump back over to our API documentation, and I'm going to grab the rest of the URL. Okay, that's all I got to grab. I'll drop that in there. And if I look at it one more time, it says no parameters are required for this API endpoint. All right, so I don't have to pass anything else in. It's just a strict GET request to this endpoint. Okay. So let's just do that, and let's save it. And now we've got to trigger this plugin to actually do something. So we're going to do this on a new submission, okay? So our initializer, once again, is our component that allows us to sequence different things happening on the page, all right? So in this case, we're going to say on a new submission, which means I'm entering this page for the first time, I want to trigger that plugin. So I'm going to choose new submission, then I'm going to choose my plugin. I'm going to choose the trigger type and the value of go, which means, hey, go get this data. All right, I'll save it and I'll preview it. Okay. Now, of course, since I had, I'm going to log out. I had an old session open. I want to start really fresh here. So let's try this again. I'm going to preview. And because I had Rbac on, it's not going to give me access to this module. I'm going to have to be a user of a role that has permissions to this module to access it. So I'm going to type in Nick plus Spartan1 at unqork.com. And I'm going to go grab my temporary password, okay? So every time you create a user in Unqork, so you can create users on behalf of other people in Unqork, we're going to generate you a temporary password that's going to expire in 7 days. And when I enter that password in on the front end, the first time in, it's going to tell me to reset it, okay? Once again, security first model that you're going to get a nice auto-generated password, but you're going to be asked to create it, change it to something that works for you. So let me go in. I'll change my password. All right, now I'm in. Now, of course, a plugin is not a visual component, so you don't see anything on the screen. So I'm going to refresh again. I'm going to go into my network, okay? And I'm going to search for execute. All right, so execute is the endpoint that sits on the Unqork server that funnels all your web traffic through. Any API calls that you make through the plugin, at least through the browser, are going to go through this endpoint. So now when I look at this endpoint, you'll see that it effectively just made a call to the metadata metals API. And I look at the preview, and here we go. I've got back all of the metals and the data that they are providing me with that for the metals available to you in Unqork. That easy to just, in a few clicks, copy pastes from API documentation. I'm now making an API call and pulling back this data into Unqork, where I'm going to show you some cool stuff that we can do with it. Okay, right on. So let's take that. Let's do some cool stuff with this API now. All right. So that's great. So we got some metals coming through. What else can we do? What else can we pull in? Actually, I want to show you one other thing first. So you'll see here inside of the preview, so the preview in your developer tools, which whether or not you're using Unqork or another no-code system, or you're writing code, if you're that crazy and you want to write code, you're probably going to be doing a lot of work in the network and a lot of work in the console. Chrome and anything else, Chromium based, and Firefox has got a great one too. Super key element of a browser here. All right. So you'll see inside of this response, there's actually this key called data. And inside of data are actually all of the metals that are available to me. So one additional thing I'm going to do now on this plugin just to wrap up that part of it. So I'm going to drop in a hidden field. All right, I'm going to call this hidden field metals. All right, and in my plugin, I'm just going to output to that metals. So this is basically saying I want to take that data attribute of the response, which I could see exists over here, and I just want to throw it into the field called metals. So I can use it later. So then the plugin kind of just functions as the connection, right? And its responsibility is to just make the call, and whatever data is required by the user from the response of that call gets put into the appropriate components that can then be used later in some more complex logic and cool stuff. All right, there we go. Just get that over with. Cool. So now let's actually let people, let's do more. Let's do more with this Halo Infinite API. So if I go in, there's a few other endpoints that I have available to me. The one that I'm going to play around with on top of the metals one is going to be this multiplayer one. Okay, so this is actually going to allow me, as you can see from the parameters here, type in a gamer tag. So whatever your Xbox gamer tag is, the type of game that you're going to play. So in this case, I'm going to do match made PvP. So this is basically when you're online, firing up against, random folks online, maybe some friends you got with you, whatever it is. And then it's going to give me back a bunch of information around my gamer or whatever gamer I look for. Okay, so it's going to tell me things like kills, deaths, assists, betrayals, which is always fun. Although they did take off friendly fire in Halo Infinite, but I remember back in the day of Halo 2 where you just betray your teammates and you get that guy go betrayal. It's actually was a lot of fun. All right. So let's do something with that endpoint, right? So in order to do that, though, as this API said, I've got to send it a gamer tag, right? So how am I going to get this gamer tag? So let's put on some UI elements that allow a user to enter their gamer tag and pull back this information. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a field group, right? Because we're going to have a few fields. We're going to have an input. We're going to have a button, right? We're going to have a couple different things that are going to be part of that experience. So I'm going to grab this. I'm going to drop it in. This is going to allow us to group some components together. And that's helpful within the module building experience, right? So within this backend, it's very helpful to group components that are all kind of functioning together to do a certain thing. But also then that's going to give you some opportunity on the front end to maybe style this field group to make it look a certain way. And, and I'll show you, I'm going to actually hide and show field groups, which will hide and show entire groups of components and elements that are on the page. So for this case, we're gonna add a field group, or we're gonna drop some more components inside it. All right, so now let's drop in a text field. All right, let's just call this gamer tag, and we're gonna save this gamer tag. All right, this is gonna be one of the attributes. So we're gonna create a profile here. I don't know if I said this. We're gonna create your gamer profile. All right, using this data to pull back, we're gonna create a gamer profile for you. So we're gonna save some data against that profile. And down here with this store data in database checkbox, that's going to tell my module that when it's saved, that I want this data to make it into the database. Not every field that you're going to have on your page is something that you want to save into the database. You might be formatting dates or strings to look a certain way to show a user something that's nice and friendly. Take a date. I said date. Let's take a date for an example. When you store a date in a database, right, you want it to have a very computer-friendly date stamp. You want year, month, day, hour, minute, second in 24-hour time, right? Because that's going to make filtering very easy. That makes sorting very easy. That's the kind of format that a computer loves a date in. But I assure you that no one's going to want to go look at a date, a year, month, day, 24-hour time, especially not in America where we've yet to adopt a 24-hour. We don't adopt a 24-hour time. I shouldn't say yet. You can argue that both ways, but we do need to adopt a metric system for everything else. But one way or another, that's not how you're going to want to show it to a user. So you might want to format that data or that date for an end user display and put that into a field. But that's not something you want to save to the database. You only want to save that raw date that a computer is going to love you for, right? So we're going to save the gamer tag there. And then we're going to add a button component, right? Because once I've entered this gamer tag, I'm going to want to go look for that gamer. So let's just call it button search. We'll make search the label of the button. And there's a few different button types here. I'll show you save a second later, but an event just basically says, hey, when this button is clicked, I want you to do something on the page, okay? So in this case, when this button is clicked, I'm gonna wanna make a call. Now I actually haven't added in my plugin first, so it's not auto-completing for me, but you do get the autocomplete of the other components available for triggering. In this case, I'm just gonna call it plug gamer tag, and I'll type it in ahead of time just so it's ready to go. All right, cool. Now, once I've entered this gamer tag and I've hit search, let's go get that gamer data, okay? So for this case, I'm going to drop in my plugin here. And as I said, I'm going to call it plug gamertag. And once again, we're going to hit that Halo API. Okay. Now, jumping back to our documentation, the endpoint here is different. Now, everything in the beginning is the same, which is why I entered everything up to this version number. In fact, you might have noticed I'm using an older version in my setup, but it's probably okay for this case. But it is a great way where you can set up multiple different endpoints or multiple different services in that service administration. You can set up multiple different services to hit different versions of an API. So maybe you want to upgrade your entire service to hit the new version. So if I went back down and I chose the Halo one, right? Maybe I do just want to come in and say, hey, we're ready to upgrade to version 038. So I'm just going to go change that here. And then every place where I'm referencing this service, all the plugins that I'm using that reference this service are going to get that upgrade to the new version of the API. You might be able to get away with doing that. But one of the reasons that you have API versioning is so that these APIs can make sometimes breaking changes, not backwards compatible changes to their API. So maybe somebody made a change in the 038 that's very different than 035, and those two aren't compatible. You don't have to update. You can add a second service, maybe called Halo 0.38, and then you can start to replace your components, replace your plugins one by one as you conform them to the new specifications of the higher level of the version. But in this case, I think it's going to work just fine with 0.35, so I'm going to leave it as is. But either way, I got to come in now. Now I'm going to grab this once again. Okay, so I'll come back to this plugin, and I'll drop there. Now, what's different about this versus our other one? So the first thing is that this requires some parameters to be sent in. Okay, and it's going to obviously ask me for a gamer tag, and again, what type of matches I want my value for. So I'm going to grab match made PvP. All right, I'm going to go back into my plugin, and I'm going to say, okay, well, it wants a property called filter, and we want to give it match made PvP. Okay, so the filter column of this plugin is going to align with the property name or the parameter name the API tells you to send in. So it wants filter, so I'm going to give it filter. Now, in this case, it's a static value. I just want match made PvP. You'll see there are a few different options. So certainly I could do something more dynamic if I wanted to give people options to look for different types of games that they've played. But again, we're just going to do PvP or player versus player, person versus person in this. And then the other thing it's asking for is a gamer tag. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to want a gamer tag because that's the property it's called it. And now, instead of me hard coding in a value of match made PvP, I'm going to throw in the gamer tag, which is the value of that text field that I dragged in earlier for the gamer tag. So when someone's on the front end, they type in their gamer tag. When this plugin gets executed, it's going to dynamically pull the value out of that text field and send it to the API. Okay. Now, once again, I'll spoiler alert. The data is going to come back very similarly to the data that came back in the Metals API. So I'm just going to jump the gun for a second here, and I'll add in a property ID called stats, where I'm going to drop in the data that came back. So I'll do that. And then just as I did for my Metals, I'll have another attribute called stats here. Okay. Now, what you'll notice here is the stored data in database is not checked. All right, but I'm going to want to check this because I do want to save these stats to your profile. The reason that it's not checked for the hidden component is because the hidden component is a very flexible component. You can store all different types of data in it. Again, a lot of times if they're hidden, it's by nature something that a user doesn't see. So there's a number of instances where you're not going to persist that data. It might be some intermediate data that you're going to capture along the way as your module is processing, but you may not want to store in the database. In this case, we do, so I'm going to check the box here. All right, so I'll hit save, and let's jump over, and let's refresh. Cool, so now I've got a text field for my gamer tag, and I've got a search. So if I come down here, if I come down here, and I'm going to type in my gamer tag, Gamblend, and I'm going to hit search. Okay, and you're going to see another execute is going to fire off. And it's going to take a second because it's actually pulling back a lot of data. And maybe, in another session, we'll talk about how you could, cache data, pre-process the data so you don't have to make these API calls live every time. But maybe you do want to make the API calls live every time. Like you just played a few games of Halo, you want to see your updated statistics, so maybe you want to make this call. Either way, now I've got back my data, right? So for the gamer tag Gamblend and the filter of match made PvP, here are all my statistics. All right, how good or bad, for that matter, most likely of a player I actually am. Okay, cool. So now let's do something with this data, right? They're giving me a lot of information, all of these breakdowns, shots, damage, summary, you name it. It's got a lot of stuff. Let's show some cool stuff that we can actually do with this data, again, all without having to write any code to interact with this data, right? So here we go. So let's jump back over now. Okay, cool. So we're going to do some, again, some statistical analysis, let's call it, on top of this data. So I'm going to drop in another field group here because I want to organize all the statistical stuff that I'm going to do. I'm going to drop in a field group. All right, I'll call this one field group stats. All right. Now, and let's actually start doing some statistical stuff against this, right? So let's capture a bunch of aggregations. Okay. So I'm going to drop in a field and we'll call it ag KDR. So I'm going to aggregate what my kill death ratio is, the kind of like the statistic that you look at to see if you are worth your salt in a game is how many people do you kill versus how many times do you die. If you're lower than 1, you probably got some work to do. If you're over than 1, you're in better shape. At least you're not a detriment to your team, although there's a lot of other ways you can be a detriment to your team. All right, let's copy paste this component really easily. And let's do another one. So this one, why don't we do an aggregation of your accuracy, or why don't we capture your accuracy? All right. Now, if you think back to kill death ratio, the better accuracy you have, probably the better KDR you have. All right. But we're going to capture your accuracy. All right. We're just going to paste again. Very easy to just continue to paste your components. And in this case, why don't we see how many medals you've got? Okay. So the count of the medals, so the overall number of medals that I've accrued over my time playing the game. We'll keep going. I love data, so let's have more of it. Why don't we do medals difficulty? Okay. So I don't know if you saw earlier. I don't think I showed a lot of this data, but in each one of these medals, there's a difficulty, which tells you how hard it is to achieve that medal. Okay. So this one's called End an Enemy's Killing Spree. Killing spree is when you get 5 kills in a row without dying. And the medal called the Killjoy is of normal difficulty, which means, hey, you killed somebody who had a killing spree going. But apparently it's not that hard to do, which makes you feel bad because I get pretty excited every time that I get one. But apparently it's just normal and I'm just a normal guy. All right. So I will do ag medals difficulty. All right. So I'm going to see how difficult was it to get all the different medals that I have. All right. Let's grab another one. Let's make this one pretty similar though, but we're going to call this one ag difficulty per medal. All right. Which is I'm going to calculate for you basically how difficult the average medal I am. So if I average out at a normal difficulty or very close to it, that means that I'm probably maybe just a normal player. But if I'm getting these mythic ones, which I do have a couple of them in there, these mythic ones that are really hard to get, and that's my average, well then, heck, maybe I'm a better player of mythical levels. And then lastly, I'm going to drop something in called ag medals. And this is going to end up being a breakdown of the number of medals per difficulty that we did. All right, so I'm just going to get these fields in there. Okay, and I'm going to set up one other field as part of this as well. All right, I'm going to drop in what we call a data table. All right, and this allows me to store some structured data that I could use in various aggregations and calculations on the page. I'm going to drag in a data table. Let's call this DT medals. All right, now what the heck am I going to do with this DT medals? I'm going to put in a difficulty, and then I'm going to put in a difficulty score. Okay, so the difficulties, what you see are coming back from this API. They're normal, they're heroic, they are legendary, and they are mythic. All right, and let's just say if you get a 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is a numerical value that I'm assigning to these, text-based difficulties that the Halo team has decided for their medals. All right, cool. So I've got all this. Now it's time for the fun stuff, right? Now it's time to actually go in and do something with this data. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is, and actually I'm just going to jump back to the API. So you see here, there's a lot of nice rich metadata that's coming back about my medals, right? It's giving me a description. Again, it's going to give me that difficulty, the name, and things like that. If I jump into my gamers data and I go down to core, I go to breakdowns and I go to medals, you'll see for each of these, it's telling me how many of them I've achieved and the name of it. But it doesn't have all that other difficulty and all that other rich data that I get from the metals API. So this is going to be a common scenario I think you've probably encountered in software development is multiple different APIs are going to give you multiple different sets of information, and you might need to use them all together in whatever the heck it is you're doing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to merge together the rich metadata that I got from the dedicated metals API with the light data that I'm getting back from my gamer profile metals section. Okay. So in order to do that, I'm going to show you a component that I did not show last time because I was saving, the big reveal for this more complex, the data workflow. All right, and this is really where developers are going to live and die with inside, hopefully just live, and they got that high KDR, right? Live within their application. A lot of your really complex processing is going to happen there, albeit visually, right? It's still a visual tool, but it does allow you to do some pretty complex stuff. Everything from ETL, which is more or less, what I'm going to be showing today, but you can also do conditional sequencing of events and a whole lot of other things that you can build with the data workflow. So in order to build this, I'm going to pull in my stats, okay? That's going to be one of my inputs, right? It's going to be an input to this, let's call it even a function, right? If you don't want to think of a programming term, you have arguments or parameters that you send into a function. Now let's treat it like that here. So one of the things I'm going to send in is going to be my stats. The other thing I'm going to send in are going to be my metals. Okay, so those are those two fields that I output from my plugin earlier. Okay, and now what I want to do is from my stats, I want to get that metals section of it. I want to get that metals data. So in order to get attributes out of a bigger, set of data, not surprisingly, we have something called get. Okay, that's going to allow me to get it. All right. So when I drag in my get operator, it's going to ask me for the path. So this is, okay, of this big structured data that you have, where is the data that you want? What is the data you want to get? So if I hop back over to my preview to see what that response looked like, you'll see it was in, now remember, this data I already have saved into stats because I output stats, the data into a property called stats. So what I really want inside that is I want core, breakdown, metals. Okay, so I'm just going to come back into my data workflow. I'm going to say I want to get core, breakdowns, metals. All right, so now I've got the metals that I've earned, and I've got all the metals that exist in the world available to me. Okay, so now I want to merge. I want to merge this data together. So not surprisingly, you're going to see this theme a lot. We have a merge operator, okay? So for this, I'm now going to connect the two sources of data I want to my merge operator. Okay, so this is one input is in this, like the left input, and this is my right input, okay? So the type of merge I'm going to do, we have an inner, outer, and intersection, okay? So an inner join, for folks who might be unfamiliar with it, is like, hey, I want to find all of the elements that are on, I'm going to take all the elements on the left, and I just want to enrich them with whatever data exists on the right side, or in this case, I should say the top and the bottom, right? I want to enrich the stuff that I have with whatever is over here that matches, okay? Now, outer is the reverse of that, not surprisingly, but in this case, intersection. I want to do an intersection merge, okay? So what that means is I only want to merge the stuff that exists in both places, which means what I don't want to do is I don't want to take the metals that I've earned and add on top of them all the metals in the world, because I don't care about the metals that I haven't earned. If I care about them, I want to earn them. I should probably start focusing on getting them, right? But I really want to work on enriching the ones that are similar. So I'll come in here. So I'm going to merge on intersection. The merge key, so this is what is going to be the unique identifier in both the top and the bottom here, that is going to be the same. And it's going to say, hey, these things are actually the same data and you should merge its information together. That's going to be ID, because if I once again go back to my console here, there's an ID here, and there's also an ID back up in my metals data. I just want to merge on the ID. This is some other information. Won't get into the details in that, but I am going to not keep a flag. So, it's behind the scenes stuff. I'm just going to replace the name. So if there happens to be, two different named things or two similar named things on both top and bottom, it's just going to, flatten them out. And I only want to keep the first. Now, in this case, there's only going to be one instance of each of the metals, in each side. but maybe there's going to be a world where you have multiple records on, maybe at the bottom that have the same key, but you don't care about all of them. You only care about the first one. In this case, like I said, I want the first, but it really wouldn't have made a difference because there is only going to be one of each on the side. Okay. Now, what I want to do with this is I want to take that merged data and I want to shove that back into my stats. Okay. Because I want to basically just overwrite that with all of this new really cool data that I'm pulling from my metals. So I'm going to grab this set. We started with a get. Now let's go to a set. So in order to do that, I'm going to be setting something in the stats. So I'm going to connect the stats to the top connector here, which says, hey, whatever I'm telling you to set it within this object, or set it within this element, this data structure. And what I'm going to set is going to be that merged data. Okay. And what I basically want to do is I want to overwrite what I had before in that core breakdowns metal. So I said, hey, I want to get core breakdown metal. I want to merge in some other cool information about these metals. And then I'm just going to throw that right back into the property that I started with. And now I'm going to output that. All right. So the output, obviously the inverse of the input. And I'm just going to throw this whole thing, because even though I'm only setting one property here, it's setting it on this property. So I'm really just basically taking something, manipulating it, and dumping it right back out inside of it. Okay. So cool. Let's do that, and let's save it. Okay. Now, what else can we do with the data workflow? That was obviously kind of fun stuff, but let's do even more with the data workflow. In fact, you know what? Let's stop there, and let me just show you what that is. I don't want to throw too much at you before I go in and start to show the other side of it. So now what we want to happen is we want to actually, once we got back that statistical data, then we want to run those calculations. So I'm going to drop another initializer in here, okay, and I'll call this one init stats. All right, this one we're going to trigger manually. So before we did a new submission, it says, hey, when the page loads for the first time, just automatically do this stuff. This one I only want it to happen when I say so. Okay, so I'm going to keep it on manual, and what we're going to do there is we're going to trigger this data workflow. All right, because we want same way that we triggered the plugin. Anytime you want to make a logic component do something, you trigger it. Okay, so I'm going to trigger this. But now, when does initializer or init stats get called? It's got to be called at some point. So I'm going to come down here in my plugin, and I'm going to trigger it from inside my plugin. So my plugin is done running. It's going to kick off that processing. Okay, so now I'm going to come in here again. I'll jump back over. I'll refresh. I will drop GAMBlend in. It'll take a second to run that API call, because again, it's pulling all the games that I've played. All right, now let's actually go look at that data. All right, so this is another tab of the dev tools called console. And inside of it, it's going to allow me to inspect all of the data that's happening on the page. So I can see, after I do a certain action, what has changed and what's the state of my data and things like that. So in this case, I'm going to come down into stats, core, breakdown, metals, and oh no, it didn't work for me. So let's find out what the heck I did wrong. Cool, a fun exercise in debugging. All right, so I said there was data workflow metals. I took in stats, I took in metals, I got core.breakdown.metals, I merged it in on my ID. That looks right. I set it back into core.breakdowns.metals, and I output that back to the this. You know what I'm going to do, since we're debugging here? This is fun. I'll do a little console. Okay, so just like I had open over here, the console, and actually output to this console. So let me just make sure everything else is set up right. So I called init stats, looking good. Init stats is on manual. It triggered DWF metals. That all looks good. So let me come back in and let's try this again, folks. Drop my gamer tag in again and hit search. All right, cool. So what's happening there is it didn't fire. It didn't fire my my data workflow, right? Because I added in a console element, but it never wrote anything to the console. This console, again, it's going to be just like if you're writing code and you do console.log in your code, it's going to log that to the console. Effectively what Unqork is doing here, it's allowing you to basically put breakpoints in your logic to see what's happening at various different steps. In this case, this never happened, which means I have something wrong here. So I think I know what it is. So I have two inputs here, stats and metals, and these are both required inputs, which means in order for this to run, which is actually again on a manual trigger, it's going to need data in both of these inputs in order to do it. So both are required, but one of them must be empty. So now if I look back at my data here, you'll see stats, cool, stats has got something, but I don't see anything here called metals. You know why? Because I added this metals in down here, but what I never did was I never added it as an output in my plugin. All right, cool. So now if I come back and I drop it in, let's run it. And cool, there is my set. That's my output. And now if I go call or break down metals, here we go. Now inside of my stats data, I have successfully merged in all that other rich metadata from another API. It's going to allow me to do cooler stuff with this data. Right on. Good stuff. Love debugging. All right, great. So now we've got the data in there. We've merged our metal data. We have all of these aggregations ready to go. So let's actually start and let's do it. Let's aggregate this data, or at least maybe not in every case aggregate, but let's at least pull that data out and make it nice for the end user. So once again, I told you this is the complex one, 201. So we're going to go back into our data workflow. So I'll call this data workflow stats, and this is where we're going to, again, start to do some of this more sophisticated calculations this time versus merging last time. So once again, I want to start with the stats, okay? And let's just get some basic stats, okay? So what did I say before? I said I wanted to do a KDR, so my kill-death ratio. So let me just pull that out. So I'm going to get core.kdr, which is where the KDR value existed. All right, and I think I don't know if you recall, but if we go and we look at what I said, it was core.kdr. There's my KDR. Spoiler alert, folks, I have a 1.21. So again, not less than 0, so don't feel too bad about myself. But it's kind of messy. It's really long, right? Like I don't really care that my KDR is 1.212240. I mean, it's like the people who recite ungodly amounts of numbers of digits of pi. Like, do you really need anything more than 3.14? I don't think you do. So do you really need more than 1.21 here? I don't think we do. All right. So what I'll do with that is I'm going to grab a formula, which allows me to put in, Excel formulas, basically, right? So in this case, I'm going to do a very simple Excel formula, right? And I'm just going to round, okay? I'm going to round the number to 2 decimal places, A being this input here. So I'm saying, hey, whatever you shove in this connection over here, round it to 2 places, all right? And let's just output that. And we're going to output that to our KDR aggregation. All right, let's do this again. All right, let's copy paste. How easy was that? And let's do it again. Okay, in this case, what's the next thing we're going to do? Let's grab our accuracy. So where does that live? So that lives in core shots accuracy, 32.89. That's probably where I can use some work. Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing basically as I did before. I said I was in core shots accuracy. All right, and I'm just going to round it to 2 places again, except of course I need to change where this was going to go. And I'll drop this one into my accuracy. Okay, now let's keep going. Now I merged that metal data together. So now I've got all this cool information about my metals, how many I've got, how difficult it was to achieve it. And I also built that data table before that had like difficulty. Normal was 1, and legendary was 3, I think, or whatever the heck it was. That's how I set it up. So let's actually go a step further and let's merge that data in and run some aggregations on, some numerical value for the difficulty of the achievements that I've gotten while playing the game. Okay, so for that, we're going to bring in that DT metals, that data table that had, again, the difficulty and then that score that I gave it. Okay, and once again, the next thing I'm going to do in order to work with this metal data, I'm going to go back and just as I did before, I'm going to go grab my metals data, core.breakdown.metals. Okay, now here we go again. We're going to do another merge because I want to merge in the difficulty data with the metal data that I have. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to do merge. And on the top side again, I'm going to have all the metals I got. And on the bottom side, I'm going to have that difficulty score that I gave it. I come into merge. In this case, we're going to do an inner merge. Okay, last time we did an intersection. In this case, we're going to do an inner. Because an intersection would say, hey, whatever data you have in this top needs to exist in the bottom. Now that was fine when both sides of the equation had data about the metals, and very similar data, and I only wanted the ones that were there. But in this case, it's different, right? There's going to be a lot more data on this side than there's going to be on this side, and I want to make sure that I retain all of it. So I'm going to do an inner merge which says, hey, just take what I have up top here and enrich it with what matches on the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing I did before with this false replace first, and now this time I'm going to merge on difficulty because that's going to be the attribute that's the same. Down in here, again, if I go back to my breakdowns, metals, difficulty, normal, that's what I put in my data table. So I'm going to merge my difficulty. Okay. So then after that, now I should have, assuming I'm doing everything right, if not, I'll debug it again with that nice console. I should have in there a new field in each and every one of my metals that tells me how difficult it was to achieve it. Okay. So I'm going to do something here called a create field. Okay, so this basically, if you're familiar, like think about if you're going to write code and you want to update every record within an array of data, because that's what this is, right? It's an array of rows of data. You have a couple different options. Old school, you might run a for loop, over every single item. You might now run like a map function against that array, whatever it is. Again, we don't want you coding. You don't want to be coding. You want to be doing it in a data workflow. So this is effectively going to function like that map, and it's going to say, hey, I'm going to go through every record that's in this set, and I'm going to create a new field inside of it, however I define it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call this difficulty sum, and I'm sorry you see me leaning forward because my eyes are bad, probably from playing too many video games. And then in order to get my difficulty sum, okay, that's basically going to be my count, which was from here the number of metals that I got. And I'm going to times that by, what did I call that before? I'm going to times that by my difficulty score. Okay, that was the record, that was the column of that data table that said how difficult it was. So we get normal 1, heroic 2, legendary 3, mythic 4. All right, so now I'm going to get a new field called difficulty sum. Okay, which means, hey, if I got 25, let's take this as an example. I got 25 last shots. Kill an enemy with your magazine's last round. That's a fun one to get. The difficulty is normal, which I gave it a 1, so it would be 25 times 1. Right? Cool. So what can we do with this data? Let's do a few different things. So first of all, let's just sum up the number of medals that I've gotten. Okay, I just want to know straight up how many medals have I gotten as a Halo player. Okay, so here's our, like I said, every time I bring something up, there's going to be something easy that I can drag and drop in for it and aggregate. Okay, so this is going to do complex aggregations across sets of data. So what I want to grab it here, so you can say I can sum by, I can count by, mean by, max by, min by. I'm going to sum by. I just want to sum the number of metals. Join group keys, no. My group key and my value is count. Okay, so what this is basically saying, hey, I want you to sum that count value in each and every record. So it's going to go through and it's going to say, all right, you have 25 plus 22 plus 47, so on and so forth. Okay, and then let's just output that to a field called ag metals count. Right, that's just how many metals I got. All right, let's do some other fun stuff here. Okay, let's do another sum by here. All right, so let's get back to my table section and aggregate. Now you see this thing is called table. Similar to that data table earlier, it's basically, or think of it like an Excel or a CSV, and or whatever may be, that top line are your headers. Each row beneath that, whatever's in that cell beneath that header, that's the value of whatever that header is. So again, thinking about like an array of objects, as a data structure, think about it as a table where you have header columns that describe the values that you're going to see below it. Okay. So I'm going to do another aggregation here, and I'm going to aggregate it out as create field. And in this case, I'm going to sum by something different. All right, I'm going to just drag this down. Cool. So I'm going to do another sum by. And in this case, I'm going to sum by the difficulty. I'm going to call it difficulty sum. Okay, and let me just make sure that, is that what I called it earlier? Difficulty sum. Let me make sure that's what I called it, difficulty sum, right? So this was basically, I'm going to find, hey, take the sum of all the difficulty sums, okay? So basic, again, that number times the difficulty, all right? I'm going to aggregate that difficulty sum. All right, and I will once again just output that. All right, I'm going to output that to another one of those aggregations I had earlier called ag metals difficulty. So this is the total number of difficulty points, so to speak, that I've gotten for all the metals that I was awarded. Okay, now let's use those two things together. How many metals did I get, and how difficult were all of those metals to get? And I'll come back to that, average difficulty per metal. So like on average, how hard are the things that I'm doing in the game? How difficult are they to achieve? Okay. So in order to do this, I'm going to grab that formula function that you saw earlier that I did some basic rounding. And I want to say, okay, well, if this is my sum and this is my count, right? The total difficulty and the count. Well, then what would my average be? It would be the sum. It would be the sum divided by the count. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to take the sum and drop it in here, and I'm also going to take the count and I'll drop it in here. So a formula allows you to pass basically two arguments or two parameters into it. All right. And what I want to do there, I'm going to go back to that round. I'm going to say I want to do the A, which is my sum, divided by the arg, which is my count. So that's the top little thing is always referred to as arg. I mean, don't get caught up on the name. It's just once you got it, you got it, right? So A divided by arg. And then I'm going to once again round that to 2 decimal places. I'm going to output that. And I'm going to put that into ag metals difficulty per metal. Okay, so that's on manuals. There we go. So I've done a number of aggregations. Now there's a few other things I could do here. I could actually group these things together and into a collapsible panel. I can actually even add labels here that almost function like comments that tell me. So round, zoom in so y'all can see, round KDR, so I can describe what's happening. I'm just going to leave that all blank for the time being. One way or another, now I've got data workflow stats. Let me come down here. I'm going to add these stats. I like caps. You don't have to use caps. Caps just seem very strong. All right. So now, when this initializer gets triggered, all my stats are going to run. So I'm going to come up. Let me save that. Let me refresh again. Also, I see it's 354. This is going. There's a little more. Bear with me. Hopefully, it's still going to be really cool stuff, right? So now, when I open this up, you're going to see all of these aggregations that I just created to there, right? So my accuracy is a 2 decimal point rounding of my my KDR 2. The total number of metals are 451. My total metal difficulty was 655, and my difficulty per metal was 1.45. So all those aggregations ran properly just by me dragging some stuff in and selecting things from drop downs. And, all right, I dropped a round function in there or a formula in there from Excel, but hey, if people in the finance industry can understand Excel, I think people in the technology industry can be pretty darn good at the formulas. Not to knock anything about finance folks, but they're no technologists, right, everybody? Right on. So cool. So here we go. So now we've got all the stats. Why don't we, show them? Okay. It's no fun if I have to look in my console to see it. I want to see my data. Okay. So I'm going to drop in some new components called Kpi Components. All right. That's under my charts and graphs. So I'm going to drop a few KPIs in down here. I will call this one Kpi KDR. That's one we wanted to show. Okay. And for that one, we'll title it Kill to Death Ratio. All right. Now here's something fun I like to do with our KPI component. Is something called the Kpi Icon. And if you've done some front end development or you might have seen something that looks like this, these are font awesome tags. Okay, so you can add some great fonts or great little icons from this huge library called Font Awesome on top of it. So I'm going to jump over, and I've got it pulled up already. Cool, it's a skull because it's a kill, right? So I'm going to grab my skull, and I'll drop that in, and it doesn't want the HTML because again, I don't want to be writing HTML. I want Unqork to write the HTML for me in a way that's kind of constantly evolve as the HTML specifications keep evolving. So I'm just going to drop in, what icon it is, and then I'm going to say that this KPI is going to show the KDR. Okay. Now let's do this again, right? So we had a few other KPIs that we wanted to show. So what were the other ones? The other ones were accuracy. Okay, so we'll call this one Kpi Accuracy. Drop that in. And what can we do here? So we're going to do accuracy. So when I think about accuracy, think about bullseye. And actually, I just went axe throwing for the first time last weekend. Throwing axes, one and two-handed at a bullseye. And I got to tell you, if you haven't done axe throwing, go axe throwing. It's pretty darn fun. That's called bullseye. All right, so I'm just going to type in bullseye there. And what am I doing here? Data workflow accuracy. All right. And we want to call this one accuracy. And in this case, KPI format. So this allows me to, put stuff around the number itself. So in this case, accuracy is a percentage. So let's just drop in X percentage. This is, hey, X is whatever this input is here. And then percentage is the thing I want to add to the end of it to show that this is a percentage. All right. Let's do it one more time for one more of our KPIs. Okay. And this one is going to be Kpi metals. All right. And this is going to be our total number of metals. And that will be ag metals. Okay. And if I go over back in here, let's just see. Something tells me there's probably a metal one. Yeah, there is. So I'll grab it's just called metal. Okay. So I'll just call them in and I'll just say API metal, singular, right? API metal. Cool. All right. So now I've got a few KPIs. All right, now let me go here. Let me save this. I'll refresh one more time. And you'll see I've got my KPIs. No data's in them yet. So I will do it, and boom, there it is. Looks like I missed one. Let me just make sure. What did I say here? A ag metals count. That might have been what I did wrong there. Let me go back down to my KPI metals. I just did ag metals count. And let's do it. Now, one thing I didn't like, though, is before I actually had data, it all just showed as these dashes. So what I'm going to come in here is I'm actually going to come in, and I'm going to hide this field group, okay? And then I'm going to show it when the data is ready to go. So after I've done all the aggregation, so basically this initializer is going to process down the line, right? So it's going to do my metals, and it's going to do my stats, and then I'm going to say, hey, yeah, let's make this FG stats visible. All right. Now, actually, which just reminds me is one thing that we didn't do earlier was I told you that I was going to also give you a breakdown, and I remembered this when I saw this little chart component over here that was going to give you a breakdown of metals by difficulty. So I didn't show that. I didn't do that earlier. So let me go in and let me do that over here. Okay. So this is we're going to do another aggregation. Okay, and I'm going to grab that aggregation from here again. Now in this case, I want to do my sum by, but I want to sum by a little bit differently, okay? Because what I want to do is I don't want to just sum everything all together into one number, but I want to sum them based on a certain parameter they all have the same. So basically what I'm saying there is I'm going to group my data by difficulty, okay? And I'm going to then just say I'm going to count it. So this is saying, hey, the aggregation I want here is not the total sum of all the counts. It's the total sum of all the counts per difficulty. So how many normals, how many heroics, how many legendaries, how many mythics, I think the other one is called. All right. And then we're going to output that to, what do we call it? I think it was ag metals. Ag metals. Okay. Cool. Now, as I said, the reason I remember that was because of this chart component over here. So I'm going to go and I'm going to drop in a chart component. All right, we'll call this one, what do you want to call it? Chart metals, makes sense to me. Chart metals. And I'm going to call this metals by difficulty. Okay. And then just for fun, and now, okay, now I want to actually pull in the data. So the property that I'm going to look at is at ag metals. I want to label each section of this chart as metals. Let's go with a pie chart. You know, there's a few different types of charts in here. I like a good pie chart here. The category, so that was what I grouped by is difficulty, and then the value, as I said, is count. Okay, and I'm going to save that. All right. Now let's jump back And let's do that again. All right, and let me refresh. So in this case, none of those stats are going to be there to start. Nothing looks weird. I'm going to hit search. When the data is done, comes back from the API, and all my calculations are run. Cool. Now all my data is going to show up, right? So I've got my KD, I've got my accuracy, I've got my total metals, and I have a nice, easy breakdown of how many metals I've gotten by each difficulty. Look at that, 2 mythic metals. I don't know which ones they are, but they're in there somewhere. Cool. But maybe, you know what? This is cool. I got some high-level stats, but why don't we show more data, right? The more data, the better. So again, I know I'm about an hour here, so I'll speed this up for the last section. But we're going to throw in one more component here to show some data. We're going to throw in our Viewgrid component. All right, we're going to call this VG Metals. All right, and what a Viewgrid is basically it's a grid. It's a table of data to show you stuff you've got. Okay, so I'm going to throw in, what do I want to show here? I want to show my metals. All right, so I'm going to grab this stats.core. I'm thinking you're tired of me saying core.breakdowns.metals, but hey, that is where my metals data is stored. So I'm going to reference that metal data. All right, and now I want to define my table. What data do I want to show? So I think I wanted a name and a description, right? Those are 2 good fields. And then the count. How many did I get? I'll just give a nice header for that. And then type, I'm going to put in what type of data it is. So string is text. So these are 2 text fields, and this is a number field. So I'm just going to write that in there because that's going to allow my sorting to work really well. I don't know if you folks have dealt with this before, but sorting numbers can be very annoying. If whatever is sorting, it doesn't know it's a number because sometimes it might count that the number 2 is higher than the number 11 because if you're sorting strings, that's 2 is higher than 11, but if you're sorting numbers, I think we all know that 11 is higher than 2. So I'll drop a little view grid in here. Okay, save that, come back one more time, and I'll search for it again. And now we've got all that data, and we've got all the metals that I've got. That easy. We showed you in the beginning how to just connect to the API, and look how easy it is now to drop that data into something that people can look at, and then of course count. So that's my top counted metals. Pretty cool. All right, sweet. So let's go take it to the home stretch here. And now we've got all this data. We pulled it all back. We crunched some numbers on it. Now we want to save it, right? We want to save this gamer profile so that I can share it with my friends and show them how good, or depending on how good you are, and looking at my stats, bad for that matter, I am at the game. So in order to do that, I'm going to grab a button component. Okay, and I'm going to call this button save, and I'll call it save profile. Now last time around we did an event. So this says, hey, when I click this button, go do this stuff. This time around, we're just going to save it. We're going to say, hey, when I click this button, save any data that I told you earlier to save, which is that store data in database checkbox. That's it. So I'm going to hit save. Okay, so now I'll come over here. I'll hit save. Now I'll come back. I'm going to refresh one more time. I'll go in. I'll search for my gamer tag. All right, I've got it all. I'm going to come down to the bottom now. I'm going to hit save profile. Boom, there it is. Now I have a record. I've saved my data. You'll see up here the URL changed, right? So now before it used to just be this. Now these also you can make fancier and prettier, but I'm just leaving them by default. But don't worry, you can make nice SEO-friendly, user-friendly paths for your modules and how you're going to use them in the browser. In this case, I left it default. But this is my unique identifier. I saved my submission, right? So just for fun, now that I know that I've got it, if I refresh, you'll see all the data is there. Actually, I don't see my data because I had hidden it waiting for you to click this button, but it's all there now, okay? But I don't, since I have all the data, I don't need to go through this whole process. So why don't we add one more thing, and why don't we make different things happen when you're viewing data that already exists? Okay, so I'm going to drop in here an initializer component. I'll call this init edit, and it's going to be an edit submission. So this is going to say, hey, when you load up something that's already been, something that's already been created, a submission that's already been created, do this stuff, different than the new submission, which says nothing's happened yet. All right, so what are a few things we want to do? Well, we don't need to search for our gamer tag anymore. So let's hide that. We don't need to save our data anymore because we've already saved it. So let's hide that. We don't, for our gamer tag, since someone already entered it, we don't want you to have to, you don't have to change it. So let's make that read only. And then last, let's run those stats, right? Because we're not going to run the stats when you click that submit button. We want to run it when it loads up so you get all those cool metrics again. So I'm going to do that on the edit submission. Call that a init edit. All right, and let me just pull that out of there. All right, cool. Now I'm going to go back. I refresh again this time. Boom, there it is. Gamblend, all the data that I had. Here is my gamer profile. Cool. One more thing, promise you, for all of you that are still there. One more thing I want to show. I want to tie it back to some of the other Rbac stuff we talked about, and the fact that this is a gamer profile, right? It's supposed to be social. You're going to want to share this with your friends. So I'm going to open a new incognito window here. And let's say I just sent my gamer profile to my friend to look at. Okay, so now it's going to ask me to log in. In this case, I'm going to put in Nick Spartan 2 was my other user. And I'm going to go and let me grab the temporary password that I got for Nick Spartan 2. Well, make sure I get that semicolon. Whoop, freaking out. Too many windows. All right, and we're gonna do that. We're gonna log in. Once again, it'll ask me to reset my password. And boom. Oh no, wait a second. Access denied to the submission. But I thought I was supposed to send this to my friends and they were supposed to see how awesome I was at Halo. So why didn't I get to see it? Tying it back, but I tell you that I was gonna tie it back to Rbac. Okay, so by default in Unqork, again, security first model, you can only see the data that you create. Okay, if you want others to be able to see your data, you need to group those people together to say, hey, you're all in a group, and within this group, you're allowed to work with one another and see the different things. Okay, so I'm going to create the group here called Spartans. Okay, now for this case, we just did a very flat role hierarchy, and I'm sure later on I'll show you how you can actually make hierarchical roles. But for this case, it was a flat role, so there's only just our Spartans. And I'm going to say that I want to allow any one of the role Spartan or anyone below them, but again, in case we don't have role hierarchies just yet in these demos, I want anyone who has the role of Spartan to be able to see other Spartans. So I'm going to add that group. Okay, now I'm going to jump back over to my role administration. I'm going to go into my Spartan role, and I'm going to add that Spartan role into the group, which is, hey, for everybody in the system who is a Spartan, they're going to be in that Spartan group, which now when I jump back over to this, I can now see my friend's gamer profile. All right, so I think that is it for today. Again, if for the folks who are still around, thanks for hanging in there. I hope this was pretty cool. Again, like, Unqork, you hear about us in financial services, you hear about us in insurance, public sector, healthcare, you name it. We are, kicking it in there. But this is more than just that, right? This is anything. Unqork really allows you to build, whatever your heart feels, whatever your mind comes up with, build it all entirely without writing a single line of code, with high security, shareability, you name it. So, once again, thanks again for coming here. Hope this was a cool one. Maybe try to get some more video game stuff in there later on. But again, hope this hit the mark. So. And you know what? You now have my gamer tag, so I expect a ton of friend requests on Xbox to come and help me raise that KDR up. I can use some good teammates. So thanks all.